Hey guys, Rafe here with ComTech, and I'm with our CEO, Mike Farlow. We've been talking about cloud security, Mike, and something we wanted to address in this video is this misconception out there that once I've moved my data to the cloud or my application to the cloud, I'm off the hook for cybersecurity. I've just unloaded all my responsibilities to my cloud provider. So let's talk about that a bit, maybe starting with what an endpoint is and how that endpoint plays into the overall equation of security, even if you are in the cloud.
Absolutely, Rafe. That is a very important point because you don't want any gaps in your cybersecurity. And the endpoint is a great place to start. Endpoints are, just as the name sounds, they're your computers, your tablets, your phones, anything that you're inputting data into that's going to the cloud. And you want to make sure that that is secured, because if your computer is compromised, even though the cloud end may be secure, your end may be compromised and that data may be stolen.
Okay, so when we're talking about cybersecurity, I know we like to say it's a shared responsibility even with the cloud provider. So let's talk a little bit about how we arrive at that thought that it is shared responsibility. So there is, the client's role and then the cloud provider's role in cybersecurity. How do you see those responsibilities being shared? Who should be doing what?
Yes, a really good example is either Google or Office 365 from Microsoft. If you look at those two models, we assume that Microsoft is doing their part. Again, back to your shared responsibility term, which is really, really good, is that Microsoft has the proper firewalls in place. They have the proper security protocols, that they are securing their servers and their data centers so their end is taken care of. Well, the shared responsibility comes back to your end. So again, as we mentioned earlier, the laptops, the computers that you're working on, they need to be secured as well, because if they're wide open to the internet, if they have malware installed on them, if they've been hacked, if there's keyloggers on them, then your end is not secure. And that's where that shared responsibility comes in.
Gotcha. I told someone recently that not doing your part in cybersecurity, not securing your endpoint or workstation, is like opening the door to your business and just having any random stranger walk in and just, here, take a look through my books, take a look through my client records, things like that. I know we've seen some incidents lately with cloud providers being down or hacked or held ransom, things like that. Do you want to share any that come to mind, maybe how those attacks occurred? And was it partly due to the endpoints not being secured, or other situations that might have led to the breaches for these bigger cloud providers?
I can think of one incident that actually happened here in the state, and it was a cloud provider that they got infected because of an endpoint. There actually ransomware got injected from the endpoint, from the customer side. It infected the servers on the cloud end, and then unfortunately it even spread beyond it to other customers. So even though the cloud provider itself was secure, I mean, there was nothing coming through their firewall, they didn't do anything wrong as far as we can tell, because the bad data was being sent from the customer's endpoint, it contaminated the entire system and created quite a problem.
So that sounds pretty serious. Let me make sure I understand exactly what happened there. So just to repeat, the cloud provider has lots of users. One of their users had a workstation that was unprotected. So the bad guys got in that way up to the cloud host, and from there made their way back out to other clients of that cloud provider.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. So that sounds like a nightmare. I
It is.
wonder who is on the hook for the responsibility there, because it still seems like a shared responsibility, because obviously the workstation, they bear some burden in this, but the provider as well.
Yeah.
and the fact that they allowed it to get out from there. So, what can people look for when they're evaluating cloud providers to maybe protect themselves from that scenario? Because you had a lot of people that were maybe victims that were doing everything they should have been doing right, but were still victimized from that.
That's true. And that is a very good point. It is difficult to know exactly what your cloud provider is doing from a security standpoint. You can look at certain ones like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and thank goodness they do go through different certification processes, HIPAA compliance, all sorts of different things to verify that they are doing the right things. If you're working with a smaller cloud provider, you should really look for those similar certifications. Hopefully they have them, but otherwise just really asking some probing questions about how they're set up and what security protocols they have in place. One in particular, a nice keyword is zero trust. Do they have a zero trust architecture? If they look at you or they don't have an answer, they look at you really puzzled, I would be very afraid because zero trust is the keyword right now, or buzzword, that a lot of the cloud providers and local networks are using to keep their systems secure from modern attacks.
That's a great point, Mike. We have been beating this zero trust drum for a while, and I'm still not hearing much about it out there in the marketplace, especially among our competitors. But it is definitely something to be on the lookout for, and I think we'll hear more about that as time moves on here. One other thing I wanted to mention, I also hear a lot that not only do people think they don't have a cybersecurity responsibility anymore because they moved to the cloud, they also feel like they just don't need an MSP at all. Mm-hmm. So maybe let's just chat briefly about that, and specifically things that an MSP does for a business like patching, updating, and monitoring. How are those all still important even though your data is in the cloud? And I know it ties back to what you already mentioned, but maybe just as a review.
Well, it's vitally important. As a matter of fact, it's becoming so important that even organizations like the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, even passed a law in June of 2003 saying that basically anyone associated with anything dealing with finance or tax preparation, et cetera, that is working with consumer data must have things in place like formal patching, security updates, managed antivirus, endpoint detection and response of malware in case something does get on the system. They're also saying in its law that you have to have training, security awareness training for your staff. There's all sorts of different pieces there that all of those things are what MSPs provide. It's very difficult for a company to provide all of those different things, and they're really necessary. And if you're in one of those companies that's under compliance, it's literally the law. You're supposed to have this in place as of last year. So even if you're not in one of those compliant-driven organizations, still your data is important. You're still processing payroll. You're still dealing with Social Security numbers, verifying employment with driver's license. There's all sorts of data there, as well as your own private intellectual property for your company that you certainly don't want to get into the wrong hands.
And your email as well. A lot of times that's not even in your cloud provider's realm of service offering there. So good stuff. All that stuff you mentioned happens outside usually of those cloud hosted applications. So you still have a lot going on internally. So just to recap, it sounds, hopefully we've made it clear that getting rid of your MSP is really not a great option because there's so much else at stake. And that's our theme this year is risk and understanding what is at stake.